We've seen it discussed in medical dramas. We've had conversations around the kitchen table about it. But what is a disease? What causes diseases? Why should we worry about diseases? And how can we go about understanding the physiology of what's going on in our body when we get sick? Well, let's talk about that.
Warning: the following presentation contains information that might contradict what you have previously heard, or believed to be true, about how the human body works, and contains material that is not suitable for closed-minded individuals. Enjoy!
From antiquity through medieval times, through the Renaissance, and even into modern times, we've always talked about in medicine the issues of disease. Disease really is the condition where we are not able to maintain normal physiological regulations. We're not able to maintain the way in which the body's supposed to work. But what does that mean? Does it mean that we're not eating correctly? Does it mean that we're smoking and not taking care of our body? Does it mean that we're stressed, that we can't maintain what life stresses, what physical stresses, what social stresses are being placed on us in a manner that is appropriate? Are we getting enough exercise? Are we eating correctly? All of these things are usually talked about when we talk about disease and the idea about not having normal metabolic and normal physiological functions. But if you go talk to the doctors, and the doctors will give you all of these wonderful scans and all these wonderful ideas about what's going on in your body, but what's actually happening? What is the actual reason why we might be getting sick? Are we hand washing correctly? Are we allowing diseases to get transmitted to us because we're not following proper hygiene? Are we not getting vaccinated correctly? Are we not following normal vaccine protocols? Are we not using the appropriate protective equipment when we need appropriate protective equipment? When we start looking at this idea about diseases and disease transmissions, we have to really start by thinking about, do I know how my body works? And if I know how my body works, then I can understand what is actually causing that disease to take place. This helps us fight the misinformation and disinformation that is bombarding us throughout our normal media feeds. This also allows us to be able to combat the biases that we might see being projected to us from distinct websites or from distinct sources that we might go and try to find out what's going on with us. When we start looking at diseases, there are basically two big types of diseases that we will get into when we start getting into the series about pathophysiology here. And the first one is communicable diseases. This is what happens to my body when I get an infection. This is where we start looking at this idea about the B cells and the T cells activating, and that B cell and T cell activation triggering my antibody responses, and the antibody responses and the interleukin responses, the hormone responses that cause inflammation, the proteins that get produced by the B cells that tag all of the infected cells as being infected, where we look at those antibodies going out into circulation that say, hey, you're infected. These are the same type of antibodies that we look at when we start looking at, do I have immunity from a certain disease? Am I able to withstand infection from a disease that I've already had been infected? This is also where we start looking at the idea about that herd immunity coming about, where we're able to pass along and stop the transmission of diseases within our community by either surviving an infection or becoming vaccinated from the infection. We also have to start looking at these diseases as the non-communicable diseases. These are diseases that we cannot transmit to others. These are diseases that come about because we have uncontrolled inflammation, uncontrolled stress, uncontrolled immune responses, not to a specific infection, but simply to stress. This is where my quote unquote body is messed up. This is where we have inappropriate or improper nutrition, where we are eating things that we should not be eating, where we are consuming metabolic disruptors, and those metabolic disruptors triggering a whole cascade of events that's either going to make me eat more food, or it's going to cause a cascade of events that's going to trigger more inflammation that's going to lead to the symptoms and issues of overfatness and metabolic syndrome that we usually associate with these non-communicable diseases, where we have to start looking at the idea about how various influences in my life and various influences in my physiology impact how my body functions, how my body looks, and how my health comes about based off of how do the social factors, how do the physiological factors influence how my body looks and how my body behaves. That's the difference when we start looking at these various types of diseases within this idea about pathophysiology and about physiology. When we start looking at diseases, what we're looking at is we're not looking at really what is going right in my body, but we're looking at what's going wrong in my body. A lot of times nowadays, we start thinking about these diseases based off of this cascade of events where we're somehow able to modulate my overall health all based off of what I do in my life or how I go about within my lifestyle, even though that's only one part of the overall aspects of health. Well, thanks for listening to the introduction to the pathophysiology sequence. Please check out more on the podcast. We have several podcasts out looking at the issues of diabetes as well as the issues of overfatness. Watch for upcoming videos looking at various different diseases, all within the realm of pathophysiology. Make sure you're following us on all the various platforms here on YouTube as well as the podcast. Checking out the written stuff on Substack as well as our quick take posts on Instagram and on Threads.